In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the ever merciful. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Islam and Civil Rights. My name is Talha Sami. I'm joined by Habib Shafiq. I'm an author and researcher and a doctor. For several years, I've been looking at Islam in America and England. What I'm surprised to see time and time again is the omission of Ahmadiyya Muslim efforts from the conversation of civil rights. Habib Shafiq is a traveler and a keen conversationalist and reader. In the past season, we've been looking at how Islam contributed in its own way, generating its own shape and form in American fabric. This episode is unique and slightly novel. After the early Ahmadi missionaries came, spreading the teachings of Islam from the 1920s onwards, Islam truly became embedded into American fabric, perhaps in a way it never was before. It took a new shape and a new form. Jazz. I would like to hand it over to you, Habib, before I get into the technical side of things. You've obviously met a lot of the Ahmadi Muslim jazz musicians who won Grammys. You spent time with them. You've seen them from a distance. You would have seen them in the newspapers. Just tell us, what are your earliest memories of that group of individuals, because they were very distinct from everyone else.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Saab. I'm smiling because this is a very, how can I say it, a topic in which, when it's discussed, it's not really looked at it and appreciated from the standpoint of the individuals who themselves had two passions at the same time. First of all, I'm sure you're going to define jazz, and it's American, one of the original American art forms, etc. And any of these musicians who are jazz musicians, if they would have took a violin, if they would have taken a harp, if they would have took a piano, would be classical. If they were white, they would be at the top echelons. But as jazz musicians, they still achieved that. But there was two competing passions that I don't think we talk about. The first, you are a physician. Now, how many hours of study, how many days and months and weeks and years of study did it take for you to become a physician, yet you were born a Muslim as you were becoming a physician, which is also now a passion for you to heal with medicine. Imagine Haji Yusuf Latif. Imagine Ahmed Jamal. Imagine Art Blakely. Imagine these extraordinary jazz musicians who put hours and days of practice into a passion. And the kind of music that they played and the level which they played is extraordinarily complex. And that's in them all of these years. And then, Dr. Saab, you come across something called Islam and Ahmadiyya, and you pick up a book, and you are this saxophonist, you are this piano player, you are this trumpeter, and you're looking at this, and you hear the divine music from this person called Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. You read these, you hear this, you hear the Arabic, and as a musician, you hear the music. There are musicians, that are just so gifted, they can pick up the music, and they can read it, and they hear it, and they weep, or they feel it. These jazz musician Ahmadis had a passion first with music. Then they picked up another divine music for all of mankind. A music that plays to the man's salvation. And that is Islam. And when they looked at this, they couldn't deny its harmony. They couldn't deny the notes. They couldn't not the melodies. They could not deny it. So they said, okay, I have to accept this. And now you're playing, you're doing what you're doing for a living, you're continuing, you got all these appointments and things scheduled, and yet now you're seeing that I need to give some attention to this. I need to do this. And then slowly and diligently, they come into Islam and Ahmadiyya. And then the challenge for them is, how can I, when I read in the Holy Quran, it tells me to guard myself, to go not near certain things, to do all these things. How can I navigate that and maintain this thing called, this passion I call music that is so much now a part of me? Miles Davis, he even once said that someone asked him about how he thinks. And he said, I hear music. He said, I don't think in terms of notes. I think in terms of music. And so when you would meet Haji Yusuf Latif, I got a chance to travel with him to Rabwa, Pakistan, with him and his son and a group of us in a delegation.
And this would have been at the height of his success
Absolutely.
as well.
This was December 74 or 75. December. And my point here is, we were sitting on a stage and an Urdu poet was giving some rendition in Urdu. And I could see how moved he was, but we're all moved. And I didn't pay any attention until we had our question and answer session by this person named Sahibzada Mirza Tahir Ahmed. He was not the Khalifa at the time, but our third Khalifa would send him over in the evenings to answer all of our questions. So Haji Yusuf never asked questions, but his was the first hand up. And he said, yes. And he said, sir, my name is Yusuf Latif. Thank you for coming to us every night. I'm a jazz musician. Hazur said, you're a jazz musician? What do you play? Hazur sat up in his chair. What do you play? He said, I play saxophone and flutes. And he said, which saxophones? And he began to tell him about his saxophones. And Hazur knew these different saxophone tones. And then they got into talking just about the instrument part. He said, okay, I'm sorry, what is your question? Yusuf Latif leaned in. He said, sir, I heard a poem in Urdu. And being a musician, I, of course, don't know Urdu, but I heard the melody. I heard the music, and I'm still hearing it. And in other words, I know I could, if my horn was here, I could pick it up and play what I heard. So he said this. In America, when we give translations in poems, we just read it. He said, sir, could we sing this and make it have more feeling? And the Hazur was not Khalif at the time, told him, and I heard him. He said, of course you can. Why not? So my point here is this. These musicians were musicians before they were Ahmadis. And it takes years to reach the virtuosity that they reach in their fields. But when they saw Islam and Ahmadiyya, what they began to do is to manifest two passions, and to show other musicians and other individuals that I can be this jazz pianist and I can be an Ahmadiyya Muslim and not drink and not use drugs and not womanize and all of these things. This was power. And those of us who were young and we saw that, this was magnetic. This was extraordinary for us because we would hear musicians, whether they were jazz or rock, they were alcoholics, they would use drugs, they would X and Y and Z and go get rehab, etc. This was not the case for them. So the point here, Dr. Saab, is that what we never talk about is how they took this original passion and then saw some music called Islam. And they could not deny that music for Islam for themselves. And they began to take both and navigate that. Now, what we will hear a lot is how, okay, Yusuf Lateef, he's a Muslim, and Art Blakely, he's a Muslim, and they would take Islamic melodies, Islamic harmonies, and mix them in with jazz and et cetera, and take their jazz form to another direction. We hear that. We hear that kind of thing a lot. What you won't hear is this: how they were good men, good musicians, and were not steeped into this. And they served. Haji Yusuf Lateef served the Jamaat. Ahmad Jamal served the Jamaat, and others as well. So, yes. And they began to get other musicians to look at Islam. Now, whether or not those musicians, why they were not as strong or why, that's not for me to say. But the only point I'm trying to make here is that we never hear I never hear of anyone talk about how jazz was this passion. And they understand and they could read music and feel it. And when they opened up the Holy Quran or opened up philosophy, the teachings of Islam, or opened up this music called this, they could not deny that and accepted it and began to live it and died as Ahmadis. That is very, very, very powerful to me.
I mean, there's so much to feed back from what you've said. You know, a lot of these guys, they may have had difficult upbringings, etc. But one thing that's often key is they were, as you said, they were very trained in their field, often starting very young,
Yes.
learning to play an instrument. Yes. And that will particularly shape your brain in a particular type of way. Yes. And you've said how they saw the world so differently. But then at some point, whether it's they're given a book or they meet a faith space or whatever it is, they become Ahmadiyya Muslims. And the reason I wanted to spend one whole episode, which is a massive underemphasis, we could do a whole series on
Absolutely.
these, and maybe one day we will.
Yeah.
But they manifested themselves in so many different colors, even though this one small group, this is not necessarily the readers or the travelers, although they were that as well, and they could fit into any group.
That's true.
They were so heterogeneous. Some of them would relocate to Denmark, to France, to Canada. Some of them would stay right there in America. You know, some of them would be very heavy on the practice, some of them less so.
Yes,
right?
That's correct.
So, and then some of them left music altogether.
Yes.
You know, there are so many different groups within this heterogeneous group. So some of them left music altogether.
That point right there, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there was another individual who was with us on this trip. His name was Muhammad Sadiq, New Jersey. And he played trombone. And it's said that the trombone is probably the most like the human voice. And the trombone is a very difficult horn instrument to not only just to play, but to jazz it. And once we asked our brother Muhammad Sadiq, how come he didn't play? Or something to that effect, what happened? And he was saying that he had been playing. He was doing a live performance. And he had became an Ahmadi, studying. And he said he was never one of those individuals that were caught up into the other proclivities anyway. But at the end of the set, a woman came up to him and hugged him and kissed him right in the mouth. And he said it so devastated him. He stopped playing. And we could see that we should not ask him any more questions about this. And when he was saying it to us, he went back there. He went back to that place. And music was in him. Music was what he loved. But when that happened to him, he felt that this was now, that he made a conscious decision not to do it anymore.
See, this comes to the permissibility and the legality of music in Islam. So some musicians gave up it altogether. Himself, Talib Dawood,
yes.
They would spend hundreds of dollars and maybe thousands, even more so, in printing and time and effort and hours of printing these leaflets and preaching, right? That would become their new passion. And he said, I think it was Talib Dawood, I'm not strong enough to do both, although he was an incredibly strong man.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's interesting because I know he was also known to recite long passages of the Holy Quran.
Yes, I didn't get a chance to meet him, but there's so many Ahmadis alive and passed on who our brother Talib Dawood affected and brought into Islam and Ahmadiyya. And recently, I was in the Bahamas on a Jamaat trip, and he had donated these books, and they were in the thousands. And this was just a small sampling of the books that Talib Dawood had purchased. These he had bought, that he had donated to the school in the Bahamas. And we were able to go there and look and see how we could maybe get the books out of the box and put them on shelves as a donation. But my point here is there were so many of them. But my point here is, and my point only here, is that it takes an extraordinary amount of genius, practice, dedication to become the kinds of musicians that these brothers were, that they were. And to just to be able to then take that and see Islam and comport yourself in such a way that from then until now, it's extraordinary. For an example, Haji Yusuf Latif, which I know the most about because I spent the most time with him in those 2 weeks as we traveled. He wrote a book. He did his PhD thesis on, I think, Islamic education in comparison to Western education. I think that was his thesis. But when you would meet him, he would remember you. He would encourage you. He would always have this positiveness about himself. But the point here is, and the point that simply I'm trying to make, Talib Dawood, he and others influenced so many people that we don't get a chance to really look at what else was going on in their worlds. Music was how many of them coped. Music gave them equality. Music gave them a sense maybe of greatness and superiority among their peers or among a particular, in a particular snapshot in time. But at the end of the day, the fact that so many jazz people even picked up Islam and Ahmadiyyat and looked at it, says that it's a testament to the power of Islam and Ahmadiyyat, albeit if they themselves just could not do it on the same level as other individuals.
I mean, we've not even got to the real meat of the topic yet.
I'm sorry, bebop. Yes.
But we're getting there.
Go ahead.
But
go ahead. I'll let you do the solo.
What interests me so much is putting it together from everything you've said to what I've written, hearing about these individual stories, because the reason I feel that it's so important to discuss these stories is because this was the soundtrack truly to the struggle.
Yes.
Whether they were primarily, just musicians on their own, but when they became Ahmadi, then it was, they had a whole new dimensional outlook on things. Some of them took that on, some of it left the music, whatever it was. But I mean, I just want to add some anecdotes. I mean, Art Blakey was known to recite the Quran by his bandmates.
Yes.
The Messengers.
Yes.
Yusuf Latif wrote children's books. He did a PhD on Islam and dissertation. He published books in Braille so people could read. He went to Ibadan and became a teacher there. He became a teacher in America. Ahmed Jamal, I think I read a report, he was earning $100,000 a week or a month or something, some ridiculous figure. These guys had number ones. They won Grammy Award albums, or they went to the White House dressed in shalwar kameez. They met dignitaries. I mean, there's no manner of thing that these people didn't do. And
I remember once, the first time I went to Chicago, and there was this fence, and someone told us, see, you're looking at this fence now, it's all dilapidated, but Ahmad Jamal donated this fence, so X, Y, and Z and X, Y, a long time ago. And I had saw the fence after it had been there for years and was starting to dilapidate. But they sacrificed and they loved. And but bebop.
So, I mean, bebop itself, you could see the origins of jazz. Potentially, some have theorized it came from West Africa when Islam came from West Africa to America, and the harmonious, melodious elements of the azan and prayer were already instilled within African American DNA, you could say. When jazz emerges, bebop is almost a rebellious sound, heard as or seen as cacophonous and not pleasant, but it almost becomes a sound of rebellion, particularly in the 50s or 40s and 50s, 60s, when, African Americans are returning home from war. They're not being given any equality even after serving their country. There have been centuries worth of oppression. So ultimately, there is a rephrasing and a reformation of these individuals. And bebop often focused around individuals from bands who then broke out. I think Bird, Charlie Parker, is probably a great example, who would then interact heavily with Ahmadis.
And while I am familiar with bebop and I listen to bebop, I was not a fan of bebop. And one of the things that did not connect with me with bebop was the abstractness. And Islam is not abstract. There are probably elements that are. But I would have been, I was more attracted to harmony, melodiousness, syncopation, other elements that there was bebop, but then bebop, remember, did not stay and maintain. And many of the individuals, some highlighted individuals in bebop, were not upstanding in their own character.
This is very true, and I think this is an important point to make as well.
And so what I'm saying in effect is that while bebop is a fascination and it deserves that, and it has a place. I remember Haji Yusuf Latif asking his question to Hazrat Mirza Tahir Ahmad Sahib at the time. And he said he didn't understand the words, but the melodious, it just stuck with him. So what I didn't say is that when he came back to the States, he got permission to render English translations of poems in English. And he did them melodiously. He didn't recite it or speak it the way we're speaking now. He added music to, if it was something of Clifford Masih, a Promised Messiah, it would be melodious. And still, I said it to a friend the other day at a program. Those of us who speak English, we always get cheated during the English translations of poems because you hear all this melodious things, and then we'll get boop, da boop, da boop, da boop, da boop, and the English person sits down. Haji Yusuf Latif got a chance to sing it a little bit more and added a little bit more, drawed us in a little bit more. But for me, I think one of the things, and I'm not an expert, and I know fans who are, who still love it and like it, bebop had these other kinds of elements, and Islam was not rebellion. Accepting Islam was not rebellion. Accepting Islam was to center you and to give you peace and to give your life. If musicians talk about playing their music in a certain key, all of the band members play in a certain key. And the key in Islam is Allah's Wahid, is Allah's oneness.
It's interesting you say that, because it actually rounds us off to where I would like to end it as well. Bebop had its moment, and to be honest, jazz would eventually sort of die out with commercial popular radio. But the ones that stayed alive beyond bebop and toured for decades afterwards would be the Ahmadiyya musicians that would not necessarily be the strongest forerunners of the bebop
That's
movement.
Correct.
But ultimately, I think we will have to dive into this all another time.
Okay. Thank you very much.
But I think ultimately what we have heard here...
And no offense to my bebop friends. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But ultimately, I think what I really strove to pull out of this conversation was how these guys were a completely different group, and they found what they were looking for, which was the religion of Islam in America. So we've come to the end of this week's episode in Islam and Civil Rights. Please do join us again next time. I would like to thank my panelist, Habib Shafiq.
Thank you very much, Jazakallah, for having me. Thank you.
I would like to mention that the views and opinions mentioned by myself and the panelist are their views only and do not necessarily represent the views and outlook of the Voice of Islam Radio. For feedback and more information, or to listen to this episode again, please log on to www.voiceofislam.co.uk. Up until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah.